Philip Larkin was an important voice in English poetry in the second half of the 20th century. He lived from 1922 to 1985. He was offered the position of Poet Laureate in 1984 at the death of John Betjeman, but turned it down. Much of Larkin's poetry expresses a dark vision of human existence with its loneliness and misunderstandings. But he responded to criticism about this negativity in this way. People say that I'm very negative, and I suppose I am. But the impulse for producing a poem is never negative. The most negative poem in the world is a very positive thing to have done. I want to look at two of his poems which engage with a changing British culture, changing in its religious faith and in its sexual mores. The first is Church-Going, which he published in 1955. Once I am sure there's nothing going on, I step inside, letting the door thud shut. Another church, matting, seats and stone, and little books, sprawlings of flowers cut for Sunday, brownish now, some brass and stuff up at the holy end, the small, neat organ, and a tense, musty, unignorable silence brewed God knows how long. Hatless, I take off my cycle clips in awkward reverence. Move forward, run my hand around the font. From where I stand, the roof looks almost new. Cleaned or restored? Someone would know, I don't. Mounting the lectern, I peruse a few hectoring large-scale verses and pronounce, "Here endeth," much more loudly than I'd meant. The echoes snigger briefly. Back at the door, I sign the book, donate an Irish sixpence, reflect the place was not worth stopping for. Notice the subtle rhyme here. There's a strict rhyme scheme. It really does rhyme. A, B, A, B, C, B, D, C, D. But Larkin uses lots of slant rhymes, stuff and off, silence and reverence. So you don't necessarily notice. It still sounds very natural and conversational. The title of the poem sets up our false expectations. Church-going usually means attending a worship service. But here, Larkin only goes into the church after he figures out there's no service going on. His description of the church reveals that the speaker is not an expert on religious services or church architecture. He sees little books, prayer books, hymnals, calls the apse the holy end, and he can't tell what's been done to the roof. He's not really comfortable in this church. The silence feels tense. He knows he's supposed to show his respect, but since he's not wearing a hat, he takes off his cycle clips, which you clip to your trouser legs to keep them from getting caught up in the chains. He climbs up behind the lectionary where the Bible reading for that day is delivered, looks at the large print Bible, right? It's designed for public reading, the hectoring large-scale verses, and then says the phrase that's used at the end of a Bible reading in church, "Here endeth the lesson." As it turns out, this is appropriate because he's thinking about the end of faith and the end of the churches themselves in the next stanzas. It was not worth stopping for, yet stop I did. In fact, I often do, and always end much at a loss like this, wondering what to look for. Wondering, too, when churches will fall completely out of use, what we shall turn them into, if we shall keep a few cathedrals chronically on show, their parchment, plate, and pyx in locked cases, and let the rest rent free to rain and sheep. Shall we avoid them as unlucky places? Or after dark will dubious women come to make their children touch a particular stone, pick simples for a cancer, or on some advised night see walking a dead one? Power of some sort will go on in games and riddles, seemingly at random, but superstition, like belief, must die, and what remains when disbelief has gone? Grass weedy pavement, brambles, buttress, sky. So Larkin imagines a time when churches are no longer used for worship, right? What will we do with them? Turn them into museums, right? A few cathedrals chronically on show. Note the brilliant use, he's so careful with his word choice, the brilliant use of the word chronically, right? That's a word usually associated with disease, a chronic illness. But here, it's the cathedrals that are chronic. Or will most of them just be left to decay? I particularly like the word choice in the second to last line. What remains when disbelief has gone, right? Not when belief has gone, but when disbelief has gone. So what's the difference, right? Why is disbelief the perfect word there? I like to think about it in terms of an ancient Greek god, let's say Apollo, because he's one of my favorites. Not only does no one believe in Apollo anymore, nobody thinks of himself as a disbeliever in Apollo, not the way that an atheist today can still define himself against Judeo-Christian belief. So with regard to Apollo, not only has belief gone, disbelief has gone. And Larkin imagines a day when this will be true of Christianity as well. In the final line of the stanza, he describes what he sees when he looks at the church, right? Starting from the bottom and moving to the top. So grass, weedy pavement, brambles, buttress, sky. A shape, less recognizable each week, a purpose, more obscure. I wonder who will be the last, the very last, to seek this place for what it was. One of the crew that tap and jot and know what rude lofts were, some ruin bibber, randy for antique, or Christmas addict, counting on a whiff of gown and bands and organ pipes and myrrh. Or will he be my representative, bored, uninformed, knowing the ghostly silt dispersed, yet tending to this cross of ground through suburb scrub, because it held unspilt so long and equably what since is found only in separation, marriage and birth and death, and thoughts of these, for which was built this special shell. For, though I've no idea what this accoutred frowsty barn is worth, it pleases me to stand in silence here. He wonders who's going to be the last one to come to a church for what it once was. Will it be an expert on church architecture? Will it be someone who just visits ancient ruins? Or maybe somebody who gets nostalgic about Christmas, right, and goes back to church just for the emotion of the thing? Or somebody like him. And that's when he begins to think about why he's really there. It's not because he believes in the supernatural doctrine of Christianity, but because he appreciates the human function that the church served. It recognized the major events in human life: marriage, birth, death. It brought people together to celebrate or to mourn these events. Now, though, he sees, now there is no community to celebrate or mourn with. These are all separate, individual events. People used to be married in their community churches, surrounded by people who had known them all their lives. Now, often the couple and a few friends fly off to celebrate in a distant place, somewhere they've never been, separate, alone. Larkin concludes, a serious house on serious earth it is, in whose blent air all our compulsions meet, are recognized and robed as destinies. And that much never can be obsolete, since someone will forever be surprising a hunger in himself to be more serious, and gravitating with it to this ground, which, he once heard, was proper to grow wise in, if only that so many dead lie round. The churchyard surrounding the church. The religious function of the church may cease, but the memory of its human function as a place to be serious in and to contemplate life and destiny and death goes on. Now, in Annus Mirabilis, Larkin celebrates the coming of the sexual revolution and sexual freedom. But in High Windows, he seems more ambivalent, recognizing some costs in this new freedom. I want us to hear Larkin himself read High Windows, and we'll stop and discuss as the poem goes on.
High Windows. When I see a couple of kids and guess he's fucking her and she's taking pills or wearing a diaphragm, I know this is paradise everyone old has dreamed of all their lives. Bonds and gestures pushed to one side like an outdated combine harvester, and everyone young going down the long slide to happiness endlessly.
Okay, yes, it was shocking to read this language in 1967. Much more shocking than it is today. But let's look at how his imagery suggests he feels about the change in sexual mores. On one hand, he says, this is what everyone old has dreamed of all their lives, a kind of paradise. Though that word seems uncomfortably exaggerated when it's plunked into the middle of talk about contraceptive pills and diaphragms, right? Is that paradise? Commitments, marriage, all are no longer relevant, like the combined harvester, a great image. But notice his image for happiness, going down the long slide to happiness endlessly. So first he stops us after going down the long slide. So we think about that image. Sliding down isn't necessarily a positive image, though, as he tells us in the next stanza, after a pause, the destination here is supposedly happiness. But I think it makes us wonder, is this really paradise?
I wonder if anyone looked at me 40 years back and thought, that'll be the life. No God anymore, or sweating in the dark about hell and that, or having to hide what you think of the priest. He and his lot will all go down the long slide like three bloody birds.
Okay. He then starts thinking about an older person looking at his generation when they were young, envying him his freedom from religion, just as he envies these young people their sexual freedom. How great everything will be without the fear of hell and forced hypocrisy. Right? And again, the image, he and his lot will all go down the long slide like three bloody birds down the long slide to happiness. But then an image comes.
And immediately, rather than words, comes the thought of high windows, the sun-comprehending glass, and beyond it, the deep blue air that shows nothing, and is nowhere, and is endless.
This final image suggests, I think, Larkin's acknowledgement of what was lost with the loss of religious faith, the dream of transcendence and meaning. This is expressed in the image of high windows. I think of them as church windows. But beyond them, as you look out, is not God and transcendence of ordinary life, but the deep blue air that shows nothing and is nowhere and is endless. Larkin sees both the freedom from religion and the sexual freedom in British society as gains, but he is also aware of the inevitable losses that accompany them.